He was my father's best friend, and the first man who made my heart forget the rules. The first time I saw her like this, I almost forgot to breathe. It wasn't just the way the afternoon light caught the edges of her hair, a soft caramel halo that fell in gentle waves over her shoulders. Or the way she moved, each gesture measured, effortless, as if the world bent slightly to her rhythm. It was the weight of her presence, the way it pulled at something inside me I didn't have a name for yet. Her name was Claire. She was in her mid-40s, poised in a way most people only pretended to be. Confidence clung to her like a second skin, but I noticed the subtle tremor in her fingers when she reached for her coffee cup. The way she hesitated before answering, like she was guarding herself against something I couldn't see. It made her human, and it made her magnetic. I, on the other hand, was painfully aware of being 20 years younger, painfully aware of noticing things that perhaps should have gone unnoticed. My father had introduced us countless times over the years, always in casual, harmless ways, family dinners, holiday gatherings. I'd admired her quietly from a distance, but today was different. Today, she was alone in the kitchen, and the world had shrunk down to just the two of us. The air between us was thick. The coffee machine hissed, a small, ordinary sound that somehow made my heart thump louder. I reached for the sugar, and our hands brushed, just once, but long enough for warmth to travel up my arm. I could feel her pulse there, quick, steady, alive. She looked at me then, and I swear the world paused. Her gaze held mine in a way that was both comforting and dangerous, like an invitation and a warning all at once. She smiled, a small, almost secret smile, the kind that suggested she was aware of the effect she had on me. My words faltered. I didn't know whether to speak, to step closer, or to pretend this accidental brush of hands hadn't sent my thoughts spinning. The smell of her perfume, soft jasmine, slightly sweet, grounding, filled the space between us. I noticed a faint tremor in her jaw as she sipped her coffee, and my chest tightened. I wanted to ask her something trivial, anything, just to hear her voice, just to stretch the moment into something impossible. "You're quiet today," she said finally, her voice low, teasing, yet tinged with an unspoken vulnerability. I started, then stopped, because what could I say? How could I explain that the ordinary act of standing near her felt extraordinary? That her presence made time slow and speed up at once? That I wanted, without permission, to trace the line of her hand again? Instead, I just nodded, and our eyes met once more. I could see her hesitation, the tiny shift in her posture as if she were measuring her own boundaries, and the thrill of nearly crossing them. There was a rhythm to this, an unspoken conversation of glances, breaths, and the delicate brush of our hands. And then, the door creaked open behind her. She turned, startled, her eyes flicking away from mine, a flash of tension crossing her face. The air thickened, our delicate bubble punctured. Someone else's presence, someone ordinary, someone oblivious, intruded into the suspended moment. But I didn't move. I couldn't. Even from a distance, I was tethered to her, to the curve of her smile, to the warmth that lingered on my skin where our hands had met. And I knew, deep down, that nothing in my life would ever feel quite ordinary again. That I couldn't stop thinking about the way Claire's hand had brushed mine. Hours later, even when the kitchen was empty, that fleeting warmth lingered like a secret I wasn't supposed to know. She had always been a figure in my life, untouchable in a way I couldn't name when I was younger. My father's best friend, elegant, untarnished by the chaos of my own 20-something impulsiveness. I'd watched her laugh at my father's jokes, offer advice I didn't fully understand, carry herself with a poise that both intimidated and fascinated me. And yet, beneath the perfection, I sensed cracks. A quiet loneliness, perhaps, the kind you only see if you're paying attention. I caught her staring once, a fleeting moment as I adjusted the papers on my desk. Her eyes softened, almost apologetic, like she wasn't sure whether to allow herself the luxury of noticing me. I realized then how carefully she curated every gesture, how she measured proximity and tone like a practiced dance. And I was hopelessly, silently drawn into it. It was risky, too. Everyone would notice. The age difference, the history she shared with my father, the social rules that whispered we shouldn't be here, in this charged half-space of familiarity. But rules didn't stop the way my chest tightened when she leaned just a little closer than necessary, the faint brush of her hair against my shoulder, the way her voice lingered near my ear for just a beat too long. "You've been quiet all week," she said one afternoon, standing near the open window, sunlight painting her profile in soft gold. I tried to shrug it off, but my gaze betrayed me, following the curve of her jaw, the delicate line of her collarbone. She noticed, of course. Her lips twitched, almost imperceptibly, like she wanted to smile but held back. She reached for a book I was holding, her fingers brushing mine again. It was accidental, or maybe not. I didn't want it to be. There was a shiver in that contact, a silent acknowledgement that neither of us had figured out where the boundary really lay. She pulled back quickly, giving a polite cough and turning to adjust the curtains. And yet, even in retreat, the energy between us didn't dissipate. It thickened, charged with something neither of us named aloud. I found myself imagining the weight of her hand lingering, her scent brushing against me in these quiet, fleeting encounters. The thought made my palms sweat, made my words stumble in her presence, made the ordinary moments, pouring coffee, stacking papers, opening a door, feel intimate, almost dangerous. Then, at the end of that afternoon, she paused near my desk. Our eyes met, unflinching this time. Her hand rested lightly on my shoulder, a fleeting touch that could have been casual, but I felt it in my bones. For a second, the rest of the world fell away. There was no rule, no hesitation, only the heat of proximity and the unspoken acknowledgement of what had started. And then she smiled. Not the polite, careful smile she reserved for my father or colleagues, but something softer, almost private, almost hers alone. That smile tethered me to her in a way nothing else could, and I realized, whatever the risk, whatever the consequences, I was already lost. The office was quiet that evening, the hum of the air conditioner a low, steady companion to our shared silence. I was stacking papers when I felt her presence behind me, the subtle heat of her body brushing the back of my shoulder as she leaned closer to look at the spreadsheet. "Are you sure about these numbers?" she asked, voice soft, almost teasing. Her breath tickled the nape of my neck, and I swallowed hard, trying to focus on the figures instead of the way my pulse seemed to drench my hands in sweat. Yeah? I think so," I muttered, barely managing to keep my voice steady. Her fingers hovered near mine on the keyboard, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. It was a delicate proximity, like a challenge wrapped in a whisper, and I wanted, so badly, to let it linger. But I didn't. Not yet. Then the sudden ping of a message on her phone startled us both. She glanced down, cheeks flushing faintly, and I caught myself holding my breath. The moment shattered, small but precise, like a glass tap against the edge of a table. Whoever it was didn't matter. The interruption reminded us of boundaries, of the world outside this room, of the consequences that waited if anyone noticed. Still, when I looked up, she was closer. Her hand brushed mine again, this time more deliberate, fingers lingering at the edge of the keyboard. Our eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the room shrank until it was just the two of us, just the shared heat, just the dangerous pull between us. "I shouldn't," she murmured, trailing off. Her lips parted as if to say more, but then she stopped, pulling back ever so slightly. Her gaze dropped to the desk, but I could see it in the quick, uneven blink, in the bite of her lower lip. She wanted to, but she couldn't. I wanted it too. I wanted to close the space between us, to feel the warmth of her mouth against mine, to let the rules and consequences vanish for a single moment. My heart thudded painfully loud, my mind racing through every reason why we shouldn't, and every reason why we already had. She shifted again, almost imperceptibly, leaning close under the pretense of adjusting a paper. Our breaths mingled, a faint brush that sent shivers up my spine. The electricity in the air was sharp, tangible, making the distance between us feel unbearably small. And yet, when the phone pinged again, or maybe it was my own imagination, the spell broke. She straightened, smiling faintly but with a tension I couldn't ignore. "We should finish this tomorrow," she said, voice steady, betraying nothing of the storm I knew roared beneath her calm exterior. I nodded, though neither of us moved very far. When she finally turned to leave, our hands brushed again, lingering this time just a second longer than necessary. It was a silent promise, a shared acknowledgement that we were already closer than either of us dared to admit, even as the weight of guilt, hesitation, and the world beyond the door threatened to pull us apart. And yet, somehow, we were still tethered, pulled toward each other by a gravity either of us could resist, even if we tried. The rain had started without warning, drumming against the windows in a relentless rhythm that mirrored the thrum in my chest. We were alone in the living room, the dim lamplight painting shadows across her face, making her look at once untouchable and achingly vulnerable. She stood near the couch, arms folded, trying to contain a tremor I could feel in the small movements of her shoulders. I wanted to reach for her, wanted to trace the line of her jaw, the curve of her neck, but every nerve screamed caution. And yet, the pull was undeniable. "I can't stop thinking about it," I blurted before I could stop myself, my voice low, rough. Her eyes widened, the shock flickering quickly into something else, something like relief, or surrender, I couldn't tell. "Thinking about what?" she asked, her tone teasing but fragile, like a glass held too tightly. "This," I said, and gestured vaguely between us, though words felt useless. My hand lifted, almost unconsciously, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. Her breath hitched at the contact, tiny and electric. I swallowed hard, aware of the warmth radiating from her skin, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the storm outside. She leaned slightly toward me, just enough that the difference in our heights mattered, just enough that my lips itched to find hers. My fingers lingered near her cheek, trembled slightly, betraying everything I tried to keep in check. "You don't," she started, voice catching. "You don't know what this could." I silenced her with a hand at her wrist, gently, insistently. My other hand rested against the small of her back, feeling the tension beneath the fine fabric of her blouse. "I do," I whispered, my lips dangerously close to her ear. "And I don't care." Her eyes softened, but the faintest flicker of guilt crossed her features. "We shouldn't," she breathed, leaning just slightly into me before pulling back as if testing her own limits. Her fingers brushed my chest in a fleeting, delicate apology, or perhaps an invitation. I couldn't tell, and I didn't want to. The rain beat harder against the glass, masking the sound of my quickening heartbeat. Time stretched and compressed all at once. Every glance, every shiver, every hesitant movement between us became a conversation more intimate than any words could hold. "I can't stop," I murmured, just above a whisper. Her lips parted as if to respond, but the words never came. Our faces were inches apart, breaths mingling, and for a moment, the entire world outside this room ceased to exist. And then she leaned in slightly, just close enough that the edge of her lips brushed mine, almost, but not quite. The air between us was electric, taut, a wire ready to snap. A sudden creak of the floorboards behind us made us both freeze. My hand tightened involuntarily at her waist. Her eyes met mine, wide, questioning, and for the first time, I realized how perilously close we were to crossing a line neither of us could uncross. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside, and in that suspended moment, everything hung on a knife's edge. I thought I knew the limits. I thought the rules were clear. But that evening, everything shifted in the space of a single sentence. We were in the kitchen, the air thick with unspoken desire, when she hesitated, gripping the edge of the counter like it might anchor her. I stepped closer, drawn as always, and the warmth of her body brushed against mine. Her perfume, soft jasmine and vanilla, was intoxicating, filling my senses in a way I could neither ignore nor resist. "I didn't tell you something," she said quietly, eyes flicking to the floor. My chest tightened. Every instinct screamed that this was a confession, a pivot that could undo or ignite everything we'd been holding back. What is it?" I asked, keeping my voice low, careful, though my heart pounded against my ribs like a warning drum. Her fingers trembled as she brushed a strand of hair from her face, slowly, deliberately. I saw you at the gallery last month, before you told me you were coming here. Her voice was almost a whisper, but it carried weight. You weren't supposed to know I'd be there. She stopped, biting her lip, and I realized she hadn't admitted a secret about me, but about herself. About desire. About boundaries she'd broken without fully allowing herself to feel it. I took a careful step closer, feeling her exhale, the tremor in her shoulders. You wanted me to see you? My words were tentative, unsure of the answer, unsure of the line I was about to cross. Her gaze lifted slowly, meeting mine with an intensity that left me breathless. I didn't know if I should. But I did. The confession hung between us, fragile and electric. Every syllable pulled at something I couldn't name, something I'd been trying to suppress. I wanted to tell her, in that suspended moment, that I had been thinking of her constantly, that I had imagined her every day, that the brush of her fingers, the warmth of her hand, the tilt of her head haunted me. But instead, I stepped closer, almost brushing her cheek with my lips. She shivered, a tiny, involuntary reaction that mirrored my own pulse, and I realized just how dangerous proximity could be. Her hand grazed mine as if by accident, or maybe not, and the charge between us grew almost unbearable. She took a small step back, just enough to remind herself of rules, but close enough that every brush, every glance, every breath was felt in slow, excruciating waves. I shouldn't, she murmured, voice low and trembling, but there was no stopping the tension now. We can't. And yet, in that single, fractured sentence, the world tilted. What felt safe before now felt impossible to resist. Our bodies, our glances, the way our hands hovered near each other, it all screamed that we were past caution, past restraint. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside, and we were both trapped in it. I could see it in her eyes, the fear, the longing, the curiosity, the surrender, and I knew that whatever decision she made next, there was no going back. I reached for her hand again, deliberately this time, holding it loosely but with purpose. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let her fingers thread through mine, a silent choice, a quiet surrender, a step toward the inevitable climax that had been building from the very first glance. The room felt smaller somehow, the air between us charged and heavy, almost tangible. Rain streaked the windows outside, but the storm inside me had nothing to do with the weather. Claire stood near the couch, her eyes flicking to mine and back again, as if measuring the risk, weighing the impossible. I stepped closer, careful but deliberate, until the space between us shrank to mere inches. The warmth of her body brushed against mine, faint but electric. Her breath itched slightly, brushing my cheek, and I realized how long I had waited to feel this close, this raw, this undeniable. You don't have to, she whispered, almost lost under the sound of her own pulse. I do, I said, my voice low, trembling, earnest. I can't, not. Her hand lifted slowly, brushing against the side of my face, her thumb ghosting across my jaw. I leaned into her, feeling the curve of her wrist, the gentle tremor in her fingers. Our eyes held, unflinching, vulnerable, and the tension that had threaded through weeks of stolen glances, lingering touches, and half-spoken words came to a single, unavoidable point. I've waited, she murmured, voice barely audible. I don't know how long I can. Her words faltered, caught somewhere between desire and fear. I reached out, my hand brushing hers, fingers threading together with careful insistence. The contact was enough to erase hesitation, enough to affirm what we both already knew. The risk was real, but the longing was stronger. We didn't speak for long, only breathed in the suspended space between us, letting the unspoken carry the weight of everything we hadn't dared to say. Every glance, every brush of skin, every shallow inhale told a story more intimate than words could hold. I leaned slightly, almost touching her lips, and felt her shiver in response. The gravity of the moment was sharp, exhilarating, terrifying. But there was clarity now, too, the truth of what we wanted, what we could no longer deny. Finally, she nodded, ever so slightly, a small concession that said more than 1,000 sentences. I moved closer, our foreheads brushing, breath mingling, hands still intertwined. The hesitation melted into something messy, human, urgent, but never rushed. Every inch of closeness was deliberate, every pause a declaration. "I've wanted this," I murmured against her lips, the sound a whisper meant only for her. "Me too," she breathed back, and in that admission, everything shifted. There were no more rules in this room, only understanding, only surrender. The walls we had built, around ourselves, around each other, around the world, crumbled under the weight of desire and truth. We lingered there, pressed together, silent but speaking volumes in every brush of a hand, every shared heartbeat, every tremor of breath. I could feel the honesty in her warmth, the human imperfection that made this real, that made it ours. For the first time, I didn't want to escape, didn't want to calculate the risk, didn't want to pretend. I simply wanted her, here, now, with all the tension, all the longing, all the mistakes and near misses behind us. And she wanted the same. We understood each other fully, finally, in a way words could never capture, messy, raw, and achingly human. The rain had finally eased, leaving a quiet stillness in its wake. The room smelled faintly of wet earth and her lingering perfume, a comforting mix that felt like home, or the closest thing I'd ever known to it. We sat together on the couch, shoulders touching, our hands intertwined so naturally it felt like we'd always been meant to hold this space. There was no rush, no urgency, just the soft hum of shared breaths, the occasional brush of fingers, the kind of closeness that spoke louder than words ever could. Claire tilted her head, resting it lightly against my shoulder. I felt her warmth seep into me, filling the corners of nerves and doubts I hadn't even realized were there. "I was scared," she admitted softly, voice trembling just enough to make me ache. "Scared of what people might think of everything." I brushed a hand through her hair, careful, deliberate. "I was too," I said honestly. "But it doesn't matter. Not now. Not here." She lifted her eyes to meet mine, and for the first time, the hesitation that had haunted us, the age gap, the history with my father, the years of wondering what was allowed, melted away. The only thing that remained was the undeniable truth between us. "I never thought," she whispered, "that I'd let someone see me like this. Vulnerable. Wanting. You're allowed," I murmured, leaning just slightly closer, forehead against hers. "I want it, all of it. All of you." Her lips curved into a small, real smile, the kind that reaches the eyes, and she pressed her forehead against mine. Our breaths mingled in the quiet room, and I realized how patient this moment had been, how necessary every glance, every brush of fingers, every near miss had been to bring us here. We lingered in that space, tangled in hands and hearts, until the first hint of evening light slipped through the curtains, golden and forgiving. I rested my cheek against her hair, and she curled into me, finally letting herself be fully seen, fully held. "I don't want to think about rules anymore," she said, voice soft but certain. "Then we won't," I replied, squeezing her hand gently. "Only us. Only this." For the first time, everything felt safe, messy, and real all at once. Our imperfections, our doubts, our fears, they didn't matter anymore. They had brought us here, to this long, quiet embrace, to the warmth of connection that had been building from the very first brush of hands. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, speaking in whispers, laughter, and silence, savoring the kind of closeness that couldn't be rushed or forced. Every touch, every heartbeat was a promise. And in that calm, finally, I knew we were together, not just in desire, but in understanding, trust, and something that would endure beyond hesitation or circumstance. She lifted her head, eyes soft and shining. "I guess this is real." "Yes," I said. "It's real. And it's ours." Our hands remained intertwined as the world outside carried on, irrelevant. In the quiet aftermath of storms, both inside and out, we finally belonged to each other.